Can you hear me in the back? Good, good. Well, welcome. Why don't we get started? Because we have some really good resource people here today. My name is Bob Zdenek, and I'm interim director of the San Joaquin Valley Housing Collaborative and a few other things. But this workshop is really put together by the collaborative. So we really wanted to bring the concept of mixed-use housing as a really important strategy for affordable housing and community development. And we have a really good seasoned group of panelists who have done a lot of this work. So and we want to encourage interaction. This is also for my first time ever doing an in-person and a Zoom. So that'll be interesting. So we've got a good turnout. So I want to start before I introduce the panel to ask how many of you have been involved in mixed-use projects? Well, we've got more panelists in the audience. So we encourage you to share your ideas and questions when we get to the interactive part. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce the panelists in order of their presentation, and I'm going to do a quick overview, and then I'm going to turn over. Our first panelist after my brief remarks will be Roberto Barragan. Roberto is in the middle, and he is the executive director of the California Community Economic Development Association. And Roberto and I have only known each other for 35 years. Roberto has an amazing background in economic development. He ran Meta, a CDC in San Francisco, Valley Economic Development, one of the largest CDFIs in the country, many other things. And he's an expert on a wide variety of economic development and mixed use. And for the past 3 years, has been the executive director of California Community Economic Development Association. And for those of you that are interested in economic development, Casitas is a really terrific organization to be part of. After Roberto gives you more of an overview, we're delighted to have Tom Collishaw, who's the CEO of Self-Help Enterprises, and they're, in my opinion, the gold standard in rural housing. Yeah. I mean, when you think about what they've been able to achieve in the San Joaquin Valley in terms of affordable housing and other supports, it's amazing. In an area where there's a lot of poverty, they've made a huge, and they keep innovating. So Tom's going to talk about some of the more recent innovative housing initiatives. He's on a number of boards. We're really delighted to have Tom, and he's actually on the CCRH, National Housing Coalition, National Farm Workers Association, National Self-Help Association. So, I mean, he doesn't have a lot of free time I can take from being on all these boards. That's what you do when you get to be good at something. You get put on board. In addition to your work, you serve on 20 boards. And last, but definitely not least, is Joe Duran. And I met Joe a couple of years ago when I worked with Casitas to develop the business plan for the new Stanislaus Equity Partners, CDC, which is now 9 months old. But when you see his PowerPoint, you're going to think they're 5 to 10 years old. I mean, they've got a lot of projects. Joe, whenever I meet with Joe, I always bring my Air Joe shoes because that's the only way I can keep up with him. He's constantly moving fast and doing a lot of really interesting work. Prior to that, he was with the other Self-Help Credit Union, which is originally out of North Carolina, but has a very large footprint in the San Joaquin Valley. Yeah, we have seats up here, please. And so he's got a really great background, and so he's going to do it. And then we're going to get into questions and answers. We will, between the panelists, if there's questions in the chat, we'll get a chance to get some clarification. So that's what we're doing. So welcome to this workshop. We already did that. So why mixed-use development? I want to start there because I know most of you are affordable housing developers, and I'm more of a community development person, but who believes that affordable housing is foundational. But we need more. We need economic activity, education, health, recreation, transportation. And it allows, so mixed-use developments allow affordable housing developers to integrate development activities. By using comprehensive approach, that doesn't mean you do everything. You often find partners who have that specialized expertise. And I know no one's interested in new funding sources here. I know that, So it also introduces some new funding sources. And Roberto, who's got as good a grasp as anybody on federal funding sources, is going to talk about some of those. But the Office of Community Services is a huge source, and CDFI finance funds. So again, it's sort of comprehensive. It builds upon housing, and there's new funding sources. So it also creates new partnership opportunities. You'll hear from some of the panel, some of the interesting organizations that they've been able to partner with as a result of looking at mixed-use developments, whether they're facilities or commercial or education, et cetera. And I think what I've seen over the last 10 years, I've done a lot of work in this sort of looking at comprehensive strategies that build on competencies, is that they encourage more integrative development and comprehensive work. And so they improved, and lastly, they improved the position of the organization, the brand. That it's not, you're not just building quality housing, you're building quality housing that strengthens families in communities to have a better life. So I think mixed use is an important equation, an important strategy moving forward. So and what I wanted to do, I wanted to share some data, and the reason I'm laughing is the last national survey was 10 years old. So I apologize for that. But the good news, and Roberto knows this, is that there's a new national survey coming out in the next year, which I used to run a national association, so I get very excited about aggregate data because it really shows what we're all doing collectively, which is so important. But this is 10-year-old data. And so there's over 21 million square feet of office space, retail, commercial, industrial, and other. And I think when we see it today, or next year, it'll probably be triple that. And what we see, a lot of people just say, I just do affordable housing development. But when you peel the onion, they're not just doing affordable housing development. They're doing a lot of other things. And so what this shows that 45% of them were involved in education and training. 29, and these are reported. This is what they reported, not what the researcher. 29% worked with youth. And this is 10 years ago, homeless. That number will be higher, sadly. Senior programs, community safety. So we almost can bundle all these really important services and strategies into our foundational work around affordable housing. So again, sort of understanding and being more conscious in a way about mixed-use development, I think, will really help propel the field, our industry and movement moving forward. Okay, let's see. Where's Roberta? Yeah, okay. Let me go back really fast. So. Wait, I'll go forward. Wait, no, wait. There we go, yeah. Yeah, and I think that, and the slides will be available after the conference, so, okay. So it's a real pleasure to turn it over to Roberto. Whatever you want to do, Roberto, you can use that, Mike, or you want to use this.
Can we aim at that?
Oh, you want to stay here? Okay.
Yeah, I think you can, yeah. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Roberto Barragan. I'm the Executive Director of the California Community Economic Development Association. Casitas is a statewide association of community development corporations, community development finance institutions, and community action agencies, all focused on community revitalization in underserved communities of color. Some years ago, I ran a small business assistance organization in the Mission District of San Francisco, and found myself frequently assisting small businesses, startups to find affordable retail space. Found myself essentially at some point quarreling with a local nonprofit housing developer over the fact that they were charging premium rents for their ground floor space, essentially outpricing the ability of local entrepreneurs of color to rent for their new and or their existing business. When I asked them the question, why were their rents so high, their response was, well, the ground floor commercial is subsidizing the housing above. And I'll be very honest with you. I come to this activity as an economic development professional, running an organization that includes numerous housing community development corporations across the state, and have frequently lobbied, advocated, argued for affordable ground floor space for local entrepreneurs. What we've seen so we have seen in LA, in San Francisco, in Oakland, over the past number of years, is increasing number of nonprofit housing organizations serving communities of color, frequently led by people of color, have begun using their mixed-use housing and their ground floor space, not necessarily to subsidize the housing above, but to act as incubators, to act as startup space, to act as an economic development program for their communities. So not only are they responding to and solving economic development challenges, again, the growth and expansion of small businesses of color, owned by people of color, but also, of course, the critical housing needs of the same community. And so want to talk about a couple of examples today. One, for example, is East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation that has organized not just housing, but a number of uses around the San Pablo commercial corridor. Has combined, and much like another organization you may know, Unity Council in Fruitvale District, again combining their housing on the upper floors with health needs, with entrepreneurial needs, with economic development needs on the ground floor. In some cases, even providing incubator space for new small businesses. And they were able to provide senior housing, but also provide for a new grocery store that was needed in the area. Additional businesses and vendors, created some placemaking project space, and a community market and event space. So we've also really kind of went above and beyond in their activities to not just speak to the housing needs in this mixed-use development, but also economic development and community retail needs. In some of these cases, below market rents had to be provided in order to facilitate these businesses to be there. Some of this was done through healthcare system grants, bank grants, of course, sorry for my misspelling, a number of foundation grants, CDBG, and CDBG dollars. So, you know, I've always respected housing developers and their ability to layer on multiple funding sources to get a project done. Being able to go even beyond the usual is always a challenge. Little Tokyo Service Center, this was a project I was able to help finance on the commercial side of this. This was a earthquake damaged building from 1994. It took them almost 10 years to get this building redone. Beautiful old building in Chinatown in Los Angeles. Little Tokyo Service Center actually did the renovation and the housing in this project, and at the time saved an iconic Chinese restaurant on the ground floor. This was done with a combination of historic preservation tax credits. One funding source that I know many of you may not access is the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration dollars, which can help fund the commercial side of the project, and only the commercial side of the project. You can't use their dollars to support housing, but allows, again, with their introduction of their monies, allows the rents on the ground floor not to be one of subsidy, but one of economic development solution. Of course, bank grants, there was a arts and cultural grant involved in this one, and more CDBG dollars.
You want me to move that for you? Can we move that for you?
Oh yeah, I'm having to look around. The easel, Bob, move back the easel.
Sure.
Thank you. And then one program that you're probably very familiar with is Michigan Economic Development Agency Small Sites Project. I was fortunate enough to help develop some work around this project, and frankly, it's I think a incredible strategy, heavily financed by the city of county of San Francisco, to basically not necessarily construct new housing, because one of the challenges we're seeing in LA, as well as in, of course, the Bay Area, and many are familiar with, is that while we are trying to develop and create more affordable housing, in the meantime, we're losing affordable housing. We're losing in neighborhoods across these urban communities, housing that was affordable. Now there's a market demand. Buyer, so the developer decides, you know what, now I'm going to turn around, I'm going to rehab it, put some new paint on it, and then jack up the rates. So at some point, you have to begin asking yourself, wait a minute, rather than, let's start saving what we already have. And the city and county of San Francisco has provided significant funding for that to happen. Basically, 4 to 25 unit buildings. And what was interesting about it, if you know San Francisco well, is that much of the housing has ground floor commercial. So again, not only are you saving the affordable housing for the tenants, in many cases you're also saving the ground floor for the commercial and retail tenant. And these sometimes, for example, in the Mission District, are long-term tenants. And in some cases, unfortunately, they're on month-to-month basis. So what Meta has done basically has encouraged, and particularly targeted buildings where you have some iconic ground floor commercial. In San Francisco, they call it legacy businesses, as well as up to 25 units of housing with existing tenants. Buying the property, improving the property. In many cases, these buildings are under-maintained. In many cases, they are in need of significant rehab. The city and county have created a system where the identification and the purchase of these buildings can happen fairly quickly. Because in many cases you have owners that are not going to sit around for 6 to 12 months for the usual development process. And the subsidy is significant, $300,000 to $375,000 per unit. Again, with the proviso that the current tenants stay, with the proviso that these tenants have long-term occupancy. And the dollars are also available to be used for rehabilitation of the ability to qualify to create quality housing. This is a program, frankly, I've been trying to get people in LA to consider. Because, again, it's one about keeping that affordable housing that we have alongside our existing new development programs. That's it. Bob?
Oh, that's it? Okay.
That's it.
Thank you, Roberto. And are there any questions on chat or?
So when you're doing these rehabs, you're keeping the tenant in place?
Usually what happens is there's some rotation of tenants. There's a rotation of tenants, and because Meta has a significant portfolio of properties, they never kick any. Either they provide for either rotation to a different unit or to one of their other buildings.
So they would move to another building and then come back to that when it's complete?
Yes, that's one option. Yes,
And
but
have you had a hard time? Because I agree with the leasing up problem with issue. The challenge that we've seen is like Kaiser is not interested in signing any kind of a lease on a property that's going to be built 5 years from now. And then when we go through all these other processes, it takes forever to get the project to that point. And unless we can give them a hard date when it's going to be done, getting those retail tenants at the bottom or retail or office or something like that is a real challenge.
Yeah.
How have you guys been able to overcome that?
I think about it as they never has the construction work or the rehab work required been significant enough to close the business for any period of time. Most it's not because the amount of money that's available. You're not talking about a gut and rehab. You're talking systems. You're talking facade. You're talking rehab that is not in order. It's not complete in an ordered amount of time.
Okay, good. And we have plenty of time at the end to have questions and discussion and to share your experience. And I forgot before I turn it over to Tom wanted to introduce two people that helped us plan this workshop. And one's right in front of me is Eusebio Ortega, who's with CCRH and also with the San Joaquin Valley Housing Collaborative, and Andrea Salas, who's with both CCRH and helped us plan and design the workshop. So I want to thank them for that. And a very quick PSA, public service announcement, that is, before I turn it over to Tom. I wrote a book with Dee Walsh, who's the EVP at Mercy Housing on community development initiatives and strategies. And it's in paperback called Navigating Community Development. It's got a lot of good case studies in terms of mixed use and multiple strategies. So anyway, that's my PSA. And so Roberto talked about commercial mostly. There are many different types of mixed use. So we're now going to shift to a rural setting and more sort of community services and community supports that are really needed to create a more integrative community and housing. So it's a really delight to have Tom Collishaw from Self-Help Enterprises.
Great. Everybody hear me? Is this on? Great. Yeah, I think it was about 25 years ago, I probably sat in a room like this at the Housing California Conference at a mixed use workshop, and somebody threw a question to me at some point and said, "Are you guys doing any, mixed use housing?" And, most of the models had to do with downstairs, rental housing upstairs and downstairs commercial opportunities. And I said, well, does it count when we put farm workers in single family homes and during the off season they make tamales and sell them out of their garage? Because maybe we are. And somebody said, well, anyway, so it is different in a rural context, I guess is the point. We have for many years, we do both single family development home ownership program. That's really what we started doing as an organization over 55 years ago. And then we added really rental housing, mostly for farm workers initially, and then embraced in the early 90s, new opportunities for rental housing for a broader population. But we always, from the earliest phase, we would look at in a rural area, we would look at a 15-acre property, often greenfield development, and we would immediately think, well, let's do 10 acres of single-family homes through our mutual self-help housing program, and let's reserve 5 acres for rental housing, because there is a continuum there, there's a connection between the two, and we've done really dozens of projects of that type, since the early 90s. So we've always looked at housing types in that way, that we ought to be serving a broader segment. But in rural, mixed use development is a different equation. We're not doing the kinds of density that you're doing in Oakland. We get that, but we're pushing the envelope, at least in our communities, for density, pretty much 7 to 8 units an acre on our single family homes, and 20 to 50 units per acre on our rental housing these days. We do have often a unique opportunity to master plan pretty broad spaces. I'm going to talk about one example of that. And while that's exciting, and a lot of our urban counterparts or coastal counterparts would be thrilled to get a 10-acre or 15-acre piece of ground, it's also daunting. It's sort of that novelist who's looking at the blank page, but you get to look at these things perhaps in a different way. And then, we have embraced in the last several decades sort of this notion that housing is the starting point, but there are so many other opportunities. We work in food deserts, a lot of disadvantaged communities. We work in places that don't have health access that's reasonable. They have water scarcity or water quality issues, and they're lacking other basic services. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Goshen Village. Goshen, California is a small community, still less than about 4,000 people, just west of Visalia, if you know your California geography. It's interestingly the first place we ever built a home in 1965. So it's sort of our, it's our mecca sort of at Self-Help Enterprises. But we had this unique opportunity starting, oh boy, close to 20 years ago now, when a local landowner saw that we were doing good work in various communities, including in Goshen, and he said, I've got 40 acres. I will donate to you if you will create a community park, because it was a community with no no park, no recreation facility to speak of. And he said, as long as you do that, a 10-acre park that's for everybody, do whatever the heck else you want on the ground. So we had 40 acres to play with. So we turned that first 40 acres into a space, for a permanent space for a local federally qualified health provider, a health clinic, a permanent space for that. We built the community park after spending a lot of time with the community designing it. We created space for the local water provider to do not only a new well, but also a significant storage tank that the community needed. We set aside additional space for commercial development along what was becoming a main drag toward State Route 99. We created transit opportunities, including additional bus routes, and we ultimately will build 4 phases of rental housing. 3 of them are already in the ground. We have a 4th that we're planning, and 4 phases of single-family housing to the tune of over 180 units. So a few pictures. This was our first 40 acres. This is what we came up in terms of a design. We have a park that's a it's used for soccer, it's used for, it's got a basketball court, it's got a softball field, it's well used, it's got gazebo, picnic areas. We set aside room for a fairly significant 66-unit rental project. On the north side of that was our commercial space, which ended up a health clinic and now something of a stop and rob gas station, but it is still developing out as commercial, the water tank, and you see the single-family homes. That's an aerial when it was partially built out, so single-family, sort of lower left-hand corner, and our first rental project, and the health project to sort of the upper right of that section. The park was just under construction at that point. It's now completed, as is the final phase of the single-family homes. I apologize, I don't have an up-to-date aerial. That's one of the homes that was built by the families. They actually use sweat equity to do that, share labor with their neighbors to do it. Then we got an opportunity at the second 40 acres that was just to the east of that one. This one was not a fully donated site, but half of it was actually donated. And so we said, okay, how do we continue on this effort? So we designed over 138 units of additional rental housing, a large commercial space, a 6-acre commercial space that has a covenant that we placed on it to have a fresh food facility of some sort, a grocery store. There is no fresh food in Goshen currently. One has to travel about 8 miles into Visalia for reasonably priced groceries. And more single-family homes. We're going to continue our self-help housing program. And lastly, and this is something we're quite excited about, that's the first phase of Quoia Commons, which is all in the ground. So is the second phase behind that. That is affordable rental housing with 20% of the units set aside for permanent supportive housing. And let me go back here for a second. The final piece of rental housing, we're working with a local nonprofit that's going to be doing their first ever project, and we're helping them do it. We're providing the land. We're their development partner because they don't have much experience, but they're actually going to do modeling it on a faith-based model from Austin, Texas. They're going to build a tiny home village on permanent foundations that is 100% permanent supportive housing with on-site what they call a unity hall, which will include food prep. It will include all kinds of opportunities for people to stabilize their lives, learn some trades, and we're doing it without low-income housing tax credits. So this is a really interesting experiment for us as affordable housers. And permanent supportive housing, just to mention, we are, like many of us in California, we started to blend permanent supportive housing units in many of our projects. And 10% of the units is fairly traditional, but we have places where there's more. That has created some real opportunities for new partnerships, including county behavioral health programs, other service providers, and we take that to be actually a positive thing. We've also had some success in the Affordable Housing Sustainability Communities program, and one of the remarkable things about those projects have been that we've got these really great relationships now with transportation planning organizations that we never had. 20 years ago, we didn't necessarily think about those folks. And we've been able to bring some real great transit improvements. And now they brag about their relationship with us. They like to trot us out when their leadership comes down from Sacramento. Let's show them your affordable housing project. And we're like, oh, okay, that sounds good. So a lot of new partnerships have come out of these various funding sources. Now I'll talk a little bit about another San Joaquin Valley project that we're in the midst of. We're actually in construction in this project. It's not as rural. It's actually in downtown Visalia, which is a town of 140,000 people. It is an 80-unit project that will provide a permanent home for the local arts consortium who were actually displaced out of their last property that the city was renting to them for $1 a year. We're providing a permanent space for them. It's in something of a burgeoning arts district in the city of Visalia. So we're creating a space for them and all their great programs, which include youth programs and whatnot, under our roof, so to speak. This site, we love this site because it's an infill site, but it's right next to a federally qualified health clinic, and it's catty corner to the transit hub in downtown Visalia, so it's a great transit space. We are creating artist live-work space on some of the units, about 10% of the units, which will actually open onto the street and will be able to be part of art walk type exhibitions. And the site basically has the most historic significance of any site in Visalia because it is thought to be the site of the original Fort Visalia, which was the first ever non-native structure built in the city of in what became Visalia in about 1852. And so we are creating monumentation for that. We're going to create space in our lobby area that's going to be sort of a mini museum. We've actually gotten some artifacts as we've done our excavation, and we're going to have a diorama and a mural on our project that depicts the original fort. So, and we're expected to be part of historic walks. We've talked a lot to the historical community who appreciate the fact that we're honoring the site in this way, and we're going to be a stop on historical walks. So 80 units, 50% of them are permanent supportive housing units. And that's a rendering since we're just starting construction. Probably can't see much there, but it's a 3-story structure. It's about 53 units per acre. This is a full city block in Visalia, which puts it at a little bit less than 2 acres. But project we're pretty excited about. That gives you some sense of what the site plan looks like. So these are just a couple of examples of how we're trying to create communities of opportunity for the folks that we house. And so it's not always just about commercial space. It's about connecting these other activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. I mean, that's what we wanted to do, is show that there's different types of mixed use. Is there a...
Yeah, there's a question on the chat from Margarita. She asks, what can we do to incentivize independent grocers to come out into our rural areas as part of the mixed use concept?
Yeah, I can't say that our experience has been great on that because they're all looking for rooftops, and they're all saying to us that Goshen wasn't enough rooftops. And we finally put it up for sale, and we said, you got to promise to build a grocery and then we'll sell it to you. And somebody stepped forward. And we have a minimum size. It hasn't happened yet, I will tell you that. So we're anxious to see it happen. But there are some independent small grocers out there, or folks or developers who work with those kinds of folks. And there is some additional, we're putting more rooftops up. So we're expecting there will be a moment where the synergy will happen. It might take a while.
Okay, we need to give you a microphone.
I'm loud. I feel loud.
Well, sorry, but we're doing this, and if you could say your name too. We're doing this for Zoom.
Hi, I'm Pam. You talked about the blending populations. Can you talk a little bit more about the blended populations that you have
Yeah.
at the sites?
Yeah, so we are, the blended, when I say a blended population, we are doing some one-bedroom units along with some family 2 bedrooms and even some 3-bedroom units. One of the turning points for us is we really decided that we had to work on permanent supportive housing and be intentional about getting people the kinds of resources that they need, that the likelihood in our other family housing that we had done traditionally is that we have some semblance of those projects that have mental health challenges or substance abuse challenges. That's in every community. And we just said, let's recognize that, and it's not like those doors have any different color to them, or the unit sizes are any different. And so we're blending those populations now, including farm workers and folks that are coming out of homelessness.
Any other questions? Okay, so we're now at our last presenter, and one of the new stars of the San Joaquin Valley is Stanislaus Equity Partners, known as STEP, S-T-E-P, CDC, and delighted to have Joe Duran, the CEO, talk about some of their, and this is a CDC that's less than a year old.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. It's interesting because Bob said something earlier about how partnerships are so important. And that's one thing that I found out, is there's no way that you're going to be able to build anything that's even close to creating some kind of systemic change unless you have the right partners that are in place. I found that right off the bat. We're already working with Tom over here on a project in Modesto. We're going to be building up pretty soon. And of course, Roberto and Bob I've been working with for a couple of years, so they dragged me to these things, to, I don't know, show me, say, he's the youngest guy. So my aha moment began, Tom, you said 25 years ago, but 60 years ago for me, when I was 5 years old, and my mother had moved us to a place called Oakdale, California. If you were to take a dart and throw it right in the middle of California, there it is, the cowboy capital of the world. Yes. Yeah. And so we didn't speak English, and so I was 5 years old, and I remember my mother looking out the window. We were staying with some relatives, and she saw this dilapidated house that was really falling apart. And I don't know how she did it to this day, but she made her way down to the city hall, found out who owned that piece of property, made it over to their home, and bought that property for $1,700. It was $300 down, $100 a month. It revolutionized my family. We had roots down in the ground, and it just forever changed the trajectory, right, of being able to say, we belong to this community. We're just not a part of it, that's moving in and out, but we actually live in that community. Well, I was the only Spanish speaker in my kindergarten class, but that's for another time. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So throughout, as I grew up, I handled my mom's finances pretty much. Opened up a first checking account, did the translation service for all that. So fast forward, it was about almost 40 years ago that I started working for a credit union. It was a small credit union in the Central Valley that was for canneries. And that was interesting because my mom had worked at canneries in order to support us. And I had also actually worked at a cannery too in order to pay my way through school. So we started, and it was not in very good shape. I found that after I joined there. But fortunately, we were able to really go after and put out loans, because one of the things I found out is you have to have access to capital, and so there were so many people that we were working with that didn't have access to capital. So we went out and really started going to different shifts, right? The swing shift, the morning shift, the evening shift, and we started doing loans out there. And we turned it around pretty quickly. And over the course of the years, we grew fairly significantly. You know, we grew to about $50 million in deposits for a low-income credit union. That's quite a bit. And we were serving about 11,000 members. Well, 2008 hit, and I had the regulators come up to me and say, you're going to have to shut down your services. You're going to have to shut down your loans because you're giving loans to individuals that aren't qualified. We had about a $20 million loan portfolio to mortgages at that time. And I said, no, I'm not going to shut down loans. And they said, yeah, you need to, because as a regulated institution, you have too much risk. So I kind of held my own on that and decided and looked around for an alternative and found an organization out of North Carolina called Self-Help. So they were, in my mind, they were kind of like, I don't know what you would call it, but they were kind of crazy. I know they had a real weird reputation. So we ended up striking a deal because they had just funded a community development financial institution for California with no members. And so we combined, they had just received a $32 million grant from the Ford Foundation. $30 million of that was subsidized capital. And so the regulators were completely off my back at that point. They were gone. And fast forward about 2 years after that, we still had not lost one house. You know, contrary to what these guys had been telling us from a regulatory perspective. Our members were paying because they understood us. We were very, very proactive. We went out and tried to find out what their needs were, and we were able to sustain those. Fast forward, I ended up working, continued to work for 10 years, and I retired 2 years ago. And we had grown from the $45 million credit union to about $1.2 billion in deposits, and from 40 staff to about 340 staff with over 35 branches across the country, primarily focusing on low, underserved communities, really trying to find products that really worked for them. We basically had the field to ourselves, you know, so that's what we focused in on. We really we did untraditional underwriting, so underwriting that was not normal. So we ended up not having mortgages that we could sell in the secondary market, but mortgages that we held. And so we were able to get very, very creative. Well, I retired, like I said, about 2 years ago, and that lasted about 2 weeks. So about 2 weeks after that, I was a part of a community foundation, and they, as well as the county, who I had been working with on some other issues, asked if I would be interested in potentially looking at starting a community CDC, Community Development Corporation. So the community foundation paid for some consultants, and I looked up some consultants, and I remember Roberto Barragan over here, and this guy over here, and they came in and did a study for us, and they said, yeah, you guys should go for it. So then I met with the county, and our county, and I said, we will go for it, but we need capacity dollars. I can't wait 3 years to build up a staff because the need's too great right now. So they ended up giving us a $5 million grant, about $1.5 million for capacity, which allowed us to launch. So we launched 9 months ago, and we've got some stuff. So let's go ahead and go to the first slide. Shoot, I'm used to barking out commands, I guess. Okay. So we were established in 2021 as a CDC. We work to empower our residents to access to asset building opportunities through housing, small business services, and affordable lending. All three of those we've taken on as our project. And one of the things I'm going to highlight today is a tiny home villages that we have that we're working on. One of the things that we determined, first of all, is the way to bring housing into our area is infill, really trying to understand what is available within the community. So the ADU side, you know, we are a one-stop shop for ADUs, but one situation really jumped out at us. We found that there were 117 churches in Stanislaus County with excess property, okay? And it was like, this is interesting. So we went out, and I immediately found a couple of churches that said, yes, we're interested in that. So in partnership with an organization called R3 out of Monterey, we've been working with churches that are interested in building their excess property to build clusters of homes on their property. And let's go to the next slide. Oops, jeez, there I go again. Like, what's happening? Where come it's not moving? Okay. Okay, is that the wrong way? Okay. So this is a church that we're working on right now, and we're actually getting the units that are being built through Soledad Prison Vocational Correction Facility with an organization called R3 that I mentioned. And this particular village is going to feature 9 permanent supportive housing units, six 2-bedroom and 3 4-bedroom. And wraparound services are provided by Modesto Family Promise. Now, what's interesting about this is what we've discovered is we're building the ship as we go, is we will go in and meet with the churches, the church leadership, and almost underwrite the churches. Say, why do you want to do this? You know, what's the purpose behind it? You know, because we want to make sure that they have the vision, the passion to, what I would say, fulfill their faith mission in order to really reach out to our communities. So this particular church has been reaching out to the homeless for years. And so it's like a perfect setup. So what we're going to do is we're going to provide the initial construction loan to go ahead and build these out and through the Soledad Prison, and then we're going to go ahead and place these permanent, and then they're going to continue to do what they're doing, which is reach out to the working poor, or those that are on the verge of homelessness, or those that are coming out of homelessness. So that's their niche. That's what they're going to do. So we're able to look at after funding to try to bring the price point down. After we're completed with the project, I've got the relationships with 2 CDFIs that I help them become CDFIs. They're going to carry the takeout note, and we've got the takeout note currently under 3%, you know, on that loan and fixed. And so then we're able to bring also some subsidies that we're getting from the city, and so bring the construction costs way down. So a combination of subsidies, a combination of trying to build the units, you know, at affordable pricing, really getting the land without having to pay for the land, and then providing these types of services for that particular community. So that's in process right now. We're working with the city and finalizing plans on that. Let's go to the next one. Oh, God. Thank you. You can't break a 40-year habit, I guess, huh? Okay, so there, I talked about that. Yeah, see, up to 70% of the construction can be reimbursed by the city of Modesto. We've been having talks with them about that. That's a game changer when you take a look at that. So it really comes out to work out really well. The next one is a church in a small community called Riverbank. It's on 1 acre. It has an existing church structure, and it's an aging congregation. They only have about 25, 30 people, and the average age there is probably, you know, low 70s. And so they recognize that they're really not going to be around for a while. So we have worked out the beginnings of an MOU where we're going to purchase the whole site from them. And they're going to, they owe about $150,000 on it. And so we're going to go ahead and put in up to $150,000 to really remodel their building and pay off the loan. And then we're going to acquire the whole facility. That way they can continue to operate. On this, we have, let's see here, 9 units for single, and this is going to be single moms and kids. So again, an aging population at a church, and so they're going to be able to, in many ways, have individuals that maybe need some daycare or things like that that they're going to be able to provide. Also, the wraparound services are going to be by an organization called the Center for Human Services, which works specifically and primarily with single moms. So that will be a single mom, you know, build out, and then on top of that, we have the ability to build 3 duplex units for affordable workforce housing that we will have for the community. So next slide, please. I'm going to do it on purpose now. Okay. Okay. So the opportunities is a large number of faith-based organizations that's interested in utilizing the properties for housing and community benefits. Enabling jurisdictional environments. The cities we're working with right now are all looking for ways of trying to find infill housing. And so if we can get the churches and the cities to work together, it really allows us to put together a plan. And then again, the reduction of per unit costs through partnerships with prison vocational correction programs. We're really trying to increase that. We got slowed down because of the last round of COVID, because the workforce that we had at that point in time, we're on lockdown, so we got slowed down on that process, but we got some units that are coming. Challenges. Always access to capital, right? And then for us, it's subsidy administration. I mean, when you end up getting subsidies or grants, how much time do you spend really filling out all the documents? You know, how much staff time is spent on really providing the information from your provider? The other thing is a limited unit supply. We're really always looking for some type of production capacity in some way, you know, something that could work for us, even to the point that we're working with the county right now on a particular teen ranch where we're looking at making it a construction site for tiny home villages. So we're looking at trying to create our own capacity because it's just so hard to get capacity. And then obviously construction costs and current market conditions. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I think Yolanda, the next time you do the PowerPoint, put at the bottom of each slide, push the button. That is automatic, right?
She's in the house, so I kind of figured she was ready.
Okay, thank you again. This really good examples. And so we actually have about 35 minutes left, so we welcome somebody to share your experience, ask questions. I'm going to ask for you to use the mic and also to your name and your organization affiliation. So we'll wait till we get, okay. Wait, she's going to give you the, yeah. She's going to give you the mic.
Hi, I'm Susan Berg with U.S. Bank, and I have a question about STEP. When you're using those incarcerated individuals as employees and you're training them, do you have opportunities for them once they come out of the prison system?
Yeah, that's the idea. Is they're earning an apprenticeship, so they're being trained. They're also having their sentence reduced as a result of being part of the program. So that's one of the reasons we're looking at trying to develop construction sites for those individuals so they have places to go to work. Also, the manufacturing industry is in dire need of help right now. They need workers. So it's a win-win.
Okay, next, I saw some hands. Just a second, okay. And name.
I have a question about your tiny homes.
Can you do your name, please?
Darrell Levy with Family Assistance Program. I have a couple of questions about the tiny homes because we've done our research and we're in the process of trying to build some, and we find that some people call tiny homes a 10 by 10 shed, and other people call tiny homes what is actually just a real house. It's just small.
It's the real house. It's on a permanent fixture. You know, all the utilities, everything's there. All the amenities. We have space for washer, dryer, you know, bedrooms, all the capacity. We want to bring dignity. The key is, again, trying to get to that price point. We're able to, you know, make it affordable enough so we can pencil it out. So that's, again, through combination of low interest rates, construction costs, and you know, et cetera.
And
Tom, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just say our tiny homes are about 400 square feet, typically one bedroom, got a front porch, got plumbing, they're on a permanent foundation, they have the regular utility hookups. Not doing laundry though in those units, that's at the Unity Hall, but so there are some shared facilities, but the independent units are pretty self-contained.
And I was,
Yeah. So then the next question to that is you know, the cost. You know, you just mentioned that price point. I think in Los Angeles, when they did their tiny home village, they came in at like $150,000 per unit, and at that cost, you could build an apartment complex. So, but then we're looking at some of the stuff that we wanted to build, and we're required to install a fire suppression system on each unit, which meant we just added $25,000 per unit. And then they required all the other, we had the parking requirements, and they're basically making us permit it as if it was just, whether it's a 3,000 square foot house or a 400 square foot tiny home, it still has the same requirements. So now we've got a cost-effective issue to deal with.
We're really for, again, partnerships. We're really, I think, very thankful that all the municipalities so far, especially the counties and the cities, have been pretty much waived most of those requirements. We priced out a ADU, and I think the total cost for the permits and everything out the gate, and I had quoted this out probably 7 years ago, and it was over $35,000. It was $1,200. So just substantial reduction. So we are having such a crisis in our community that we're finding that the local jurisdictions are willing to help us in that way.
So are you putting fire suppression systems in them?
No.
I'd love to hear how you can do that, because our city
Sure.
is telling us that it's state law, they have no jurisdiction, they have to do it because the state requires it.
Kevin's here. Kevin, are we doing? We are?
Thank you, Mike.
Well, see, just corrected my mistake.
Good. I was also going to mention that Enterprise has a really interesting pilot initiative called La Casitas, which actually comes from the CDC of Brownsville, Texas, and it's a national TA initiative, so they're looking for sites, and I think California is one of the places that there's some compatibility, so it's an interesting initiative. It's called La Casitas from Enterprise. Other questions? Back? Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Jean Dahlquist, Neff, and this is for Tom. I was really curious about your blended multifamily projects where you're combining farm workers with some of the more permanently supportive housing, and I was wondering how that affected your vacancy rate, if you're still seeing.
Yeah, good question, and we're still fairly new to this. I will admit that. We've got several projects up and running, and more that are in construction, actually. But it has not. We have really good relationships with the local continuums of care. Michelle Smith is maybe here, but she used to run the Tulare Kings Homeless Alliance, and they've been a critical piece of that because coordinated entry is providing us the permanent supportive housing units. We're also feeding we have one transitional or bridge housing project. We're feeding those into the project. So we have not seen either. There's heavy demand on both sides. We typically run at 100% occupancy, and that has not changed in those projects that we've put in ground to date. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Pauline Blackwolf from Cormac Baron Salazar. I was curious in terms of the operations side for the tiny homes, are the churches becoming the property management, and how are you kind of operating and providing, whether it be security or all the other,
Right.
fun things that come with affordable housing?
A lot of fun things. We do an analysis with each church first, right? We meet with them. We figure out what their capacity, what their affordability, how affordable it would be. We have to pencil it out. And most of them are, at this point in time, really wanting supported services, wraparound services around them. This first one I showed you, they're going to hire a couple from their church to actually do the maintenance, that part of it. But the rest of it, they have another organization that's doing that. So that's included once you factor in the amount of rents that they'd be able to offset the expenses that they are getting.
Okay, other questions? Or in the back?
Thank you. Nora Coster, HCD. Hey, Tom. I had a question about your permanent supportive housing Unity project. You said there's no light tech. Can you tell us about the funding stack?
Yeah, we've got MHP, we've got PLHA, Permanent Local Housing Allocation, we've got No Place Like Home, and then the rest, this local nonprofit partner, they're called Salt and Light, they're filling about a $4 million gap with their own fundraising, and they're about 3/4 of the way there. So we actually, amazing to us, and they're dynamic fundraisers. They also will be an active presence on the site, including folks living on the site with the residents, and they're just committed to this model that they will incorporate. They firmly believe that what people are lacking is community. And so they are determined to make a community that supports one another and really helps people deal with whatever challenges they have, including employment challenges.
Other questions? It's faster this way.
I'm Teresa Ballard with Piatak Architects. I have a question about the Visalia project. You mentioned that 10% of the units are set aside for artists. And so I'm wondering, with fair housing laws, like how do you manage to do that?
Yeah, we wondered that too. There is a way to do it that meets all the fair housing laws. And I'm trying to think, we reached out to somebody else, actually, who had done a similar project in Sacramento, and there's a way to do priorities for the space. And the spaces are kind of unique because they are live-work spaces. They have no real bedroom. They're really zero bedroom, and they're just the ones that face the two streets, and they have their own sort of exhibition area out on the sidewalk. But we have developed something that has passed muster, and I'm sorry I don't know all the details of that, but we figured out.
I think the
stealing
state
from
regulators.
others.
I think the state regulators probably should leave right now before we
Yeah,
get too much more information. Okay.
Susan with US Bank, and I have a question in regards to self-help's mixed developments with the renters and the owners. Do you have an active plan to move those renters to become homeowners in your developments?
An active plan, well, I guess we do in the sense that we always provide on all of our rental sites, we also do housing counseling and homeowner education, and we offer those services at all of our rental housing sites, whether we have a single family project going on in that community or not. So in that sense, we're always promoting the opportunities for homeownership, but we have found it generally just has happened naturally, that people get a stable place to rent, and often they see the next step as home ownership, and there's still a drive toward home ownership in many of our communities. So, there's an in-house joke that the rental housing folks say that, yeah, that self-help housing program steals all our best tenants. But we say that, and we actually are proud of that. So, but it doesn't always happen, and that's okay too. There's a lot of folks that are going to be renters, and providing them an affordable, stable place to stay is just as important as a home ownership opportunity.
Hi, Matt Schauer from Clifford Beers Housing. It's a general question, but I'm actually curious to hear, Roberto, your thoughts or suggestions, insights. How do, as a developer who is hoping to do more commercial mixed-use development, knowing that you're moving communities frequently and the needs of a particular neighborhood and community very much change, and the needs of a residential building versus a commercial tenant sometimes diverge. How do you balance that? Security measures that are taken, reducing of parking, et cetera, et cetera. How do you pick that? How do you pick a commercial tenant as you're starting the very, very beginning of your design?
Well, I think one is to not, I think, and this is maybe this may raise some issues, but simply looking for the highest paying tenant, I think is a losing strategy. Doing a survey of the area, actually, and this is what I've done a number of revitalization efforts, is actually gone out there and kind of, what do we have? What kind of retail do we have? How many markets do we have? How many liquor stores? How many bars, restaurants? What is the current inventory of businesses in, let's say, a commercial corridor look like? One thing that's interesting is that we did this in Pacoima at one point. Pacoima is a community in Los Angeles, about 100,000 residents, about 90% Latino, and basically higher poverty rates, higher high school dropout rates, higher crime rates. We actually accessed sales tax information to figure out what kind of commercial was actually there and what wasn't there, And we were able to determine that there were certain kind of needs. For example, shoes. There was actually, people were having to leave the community to buy any kind of shoes, buy any kind of clothing, buy any kind of, school uniform, anything. And so we began looking at, okay, what kinds of retail can we go after ourselves and locate it there? So by kind of you controlling the situation and saying, you know what, we want a grocery store, we want a shoe store, we want a clothing store, we want a particular kind of retail, you change that dynamic. You change the dynamic. You're actually looking for someone to come into a location to service an actual need in the community, not just simply somebody who's willing to basically write a check. We were looking for local entrepreneurs. We didn't want a chain store, because a national chain location, whether it's food or something else, is going to really push you in terms of how much they want to pay for rent. They're really going to push you in terms, they're going to want priority on parking. They're a national chain. They basically, they dictate terms, and they don't care about who's upstairs, okay? So the thing about it is that, so if you actually decide, we're gonna go out and find the retail you want, maybe even find the entrepreneur we want to locate there, you're able to basically control the situation, and in some cases, you bring in a retail person that your upstairs folks actually want there. And you're able to control kind of the details where you can create a mutually beneficial relationship between housing and commercial and yourself.
So you've been able to see developers find entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
3 years, 5 years before the commercial space is actually
Well,
open.
I think the thing about it is yes and no. If, for example, if it's a second location for an entrepreneur, you can do that because they're willing to wait. They have a store, here's a possible expansion opportunity, and they'll basically work with you. We like entrepreneurs from second locations or third locations because they've already proven out their concept, but they're looking to expand. So the failure rate is that much less than a brand new startup, which of course will cause you problems. So yes, in that case, that would work.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Michael Segala here. Question. Okay, so in our smaller rural areas, for example, they're all built on the grid. They're ripe for infill development in their downtowns more than on the outside, really. There's a lot of vacant lots sitting around. So there's a lot of potential, but at the same time, you always hear a lot of no's, like, can't do it unless you have a tier 1 retail tenant. The banks don't like it mixing affordable housing with the commercial financing. It's too much trouble for the developer to do both tiers of financing. You got to condo the space. Lots of other sort of, I don't want to say excuses, but just reasons why people don't pursue it because it's kind of too troubling. I heard AHSC, if you want to score high, you can't put retail on the ground floor. You got to put some other uses. So I'm looking for the truth here. What is the truth in terms of the development potential of infill, traditional mixed-use housing, retail commercial space on the ground floor, residential units on 2 and 3, that you can enlighten us with?
Thanks a lot. Next slide, please. I think that I don't have the answer for that, but I think that a possibility of moving towards really utilizing community development financial institutions, there's a lot of funding that's out there, and a CDFI is really set up to really benefit the local community. They're able to take more risk than that the banks are able to take. I think we have some bankers here, so I think CDFIs are really a place for them to put some of their investments into because of the collaborative nature of what they're doing. That's how I'm able to leverage in the projects that I've got in Stanislaus County is through 2 local CDFIs. So they're able to go above and beyond the strictness that you have with a for-profit bank. I think that's one possibility.
They're also earlier and more flexible in terms of their products.
Yeah, you can, I won't say anything else, never mind.
No, I was just going to add, Mike, that I think we're at the early phase of this kind of thing, but this Goshen project was one place where we just set aside some land in a rural area and said that's going to be commercial. Now, we were lucky enough to have that land donated to us so we can sit on it in a different way than you might in a more expensive environment. But so we're looking for that proof of concept. If we reserve some land for that development, even if it doesn't happen with our project, maybe in 10 years we've got something. But it's an experiment, admittedly.
Elizabeth Madrigal at the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership. Tom, I'm really interested if you could elaborate in the the lack of transit connectivity in these rural areas was a barrier in your developments. I know in Monterey County and our more rural parts, this is an issue that we face, so would love some more insight.
Well, it's certainly a barrier in trying to access HCD resources because we just don't have 15-minute headways anywhere, including in the city of Fresno. I don't even think. Michael Segala would know that. But so it's very hard. We gave up on transit-oriented development program, for instance, because we just couldn't access it. AHSC did provide some openings to do some pretty interesting stuff, including a multimodal transit center type facility we're going to build in a small city called Farmersville, which is about 8,000 people. And so we're trying to connect some of those things, but usually the best we're doing is providing ride share type opportunities. We kind of pioneered working with Cal Vans to do that at our sites so that people could do ride sharing to work. A lot of that's farm workers that can share rides. So that's where a vehicle actually sits in a parking lot and one person needs a driver license, but 8 people can get in the van with them. And we're also experimenting with electric car sharing programs. We have those on about 6 sites now in rural areas, and they've been really popular, where people can basically download an app and pay $5 an hour to use an electric car that sits on our residential site. They can go do the family tasks of the day, even though the single car may have gone off with the person who's working in the family. So we're trying, but we think it's more than just more empty buses on rural routes, because frankly that's what you see still. We have to connect people in a different way from a transit standpoint.
Any other questions or? Okay.
Hi, Max Henninger from Eden Housing. This is a question about the San Francisco Small Sites program that was mentioned earlier. If it's an existing building that has tenants who may be significantly over income, was there like a AMI threshold that you had to cut things off at, or could you keep all of the tenants in the building if they wanted to stay?
Again, and I'm saying I'm
A little louder, Roberto.
Hmm?
A little louder.
Oh, I'm trying to remember. My sense is that there's never a situation where tenants are evicted as a part of the activity. I think that there's a threshold. It's probably a majority of the units have to be, meeting income needs. I don't think it's 100% of the tenants. So you allow, and at the same time too, you're also targeting buildings that are, in a condition with tenants that are, largely of lower income means. So, you're not looking for, that's my check, you're not looking for buildings in, and for Meta, their real priority is the Mission District. So that's where you find the majority of these kinds of buildings. There's also Tenderloin and other parts of San Francisco, if you're familiar with it. But areas in San Francisco where Western Addition or others, you won't be looking for buildings in those areas. You're really targeting buildings that have majority lower income. Mm-hmm.
Any last questions? Yeah.
John Marchante, LA Family Housing. This is a question for Tom. You mentioned the difficulties of getting a grocer to be in your communities. Do you have the same kind of problems with a healthcare provider? How do you bring people to the site?
Actually, we've had much different luck with healthcare providers. Virtually all the counties we work in, the healthcare providers, federally qualified health clinics, have been anxious to develop new sites. They've had funding streams that have allowed them to do additional sites. So we've actually worked with several really dynamic, great take-all-comers type of health clinics. So that's been a real area of success, and it's been relatively easy for them. And I don't know enough about their funding streams. I just know they say, oh, you've got a site? Yeah, we'll we'll do it. We're serving people in that market, and we've been looking for a space. In one case, we developed the actual buildings for them. In other cases, they're plenty capable of doing that themselves.
Okay, last chance. We still have time. Okay, well, not seeing any hands. Again, thank you for the questions and for participating in the workshop. And again, thank Joe, Roberto, and Tom for sharing their wisdom and expertise with all of us.